off season. Okay.
Happy podcast, take one.
Ew. Yeah, welcome to the Happy Musicians podcast. I am very excited. I know, like, I have struggled with tension for so long. Like, I spent most of my life as this like little ball of stress and tightness, and I'm really working on addressing that now. And your book, Spatial Studies for Hitting Things, has been like a huge moment for me to start addressing some of those. And before we get into any specifics or anything, I'm just curious what your journey was like. When did you first start getting into body awareness and addressing tension? Like, how far into your career were you?
I really didn't get into specifics until 2000, like early 2012, when I started studying with Mark Demolakis, principal percussionist of the Cleveland Orchestra. And he introduced me to the Feldenkrais method of movement, which is essentially, it's like an exploration type way of body awareness. In meditation, you would call it a body scan. And it essentially, it tries to help you find your most natural way of moving in all sorts of scenarios. And also it helps you understand and be aware of any habits you might have. It never puts things in light of good or bad. It's just, oh, this happens when I raise my right arm, that my left toe starts twitching. Okay, just notice that. And is there a way of doing it differently? Oh, do you actually need your left toe when you raise your right arm? No, I don't. Okay, now there you have a new way of moving your right arm with and without the left toe. And I took one Feldenkrais lesson from his wife, and I was hooked. Like, I just started experimenting like crazy.
Was
so yeah, that's
self-driven at that point, or did you take several lessons?
I took one lesson and I just went ham, like, because you have to pay for lessons.
Right.
So I figured, okay, the lesson she taught was everyone laying on the floor, which, if anybody has my book, that's the first picture, is laying on the floor. And so I just literally went back to my technique and played everything on the floor to discover, okay, this is what happens when I do this with my right hand. This is what happens when I do this with my left hand. And I just experimented like crazy.
Okay, wait, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm curious, do you know, like, what I've talked about Alexander technique with Megan Johnson on here before. What's the difference between the two? I don't know if you've done much of either. But.
Okay, so when I took Alexander technique, it was very placement oriented. Like, this is where your head goes. This is where your shoulders are for your, I guess, for where your weight stacks on top of itself. Mm-hmm. And Feldenkrais really forces you to ask yourself what your body's doing, instead of go through like, do this with your arm, do this with your head kind of thing. Okay. I usually call it Alexander technique for hippies because it's very like, oh, wiggle your index finger. What happens in your right shoulder? Oh, nothing, I don't think. Wait, I noticed that my right foot is doing something weird when I so it forces you to look inward and really observe yourself at all times, just to see what's happening and if things can be different in any way. So it's not really like your arm moves in a certain way, and it doesn't really get into specific things too much until you get into more advanced Feldenkrais technique, where you start trying to figure out, okay, how do you sit in a chair? How do you stand? How do you walk? Like, what is your jaw doing? Like, it gets more detailed after a while. Yeah. But even then, it's still more like, what does your personal jaw do? What does your personal wrist do?
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what's been so powerful to me, is that I feel like myself and a lot of musicians are always playing, and we're stuck in this mindset loop of just like do I sound good? Do I sound good right now? Like that's all you're thinking over and like that takes up your entire mental space. And this, like I've always been curious lately about what could you think about that isn't that, you know, because you got to think about something. And this is like, well, just think about like, how do I feel good right now? Do I feel tension? And I think it's a much more productive way of like using your headspace while you're playing. I'm so wait, how old were you when you started doing this? And like how long had you been playing?
It's really weird because I had always been fascinated at or obsessed with making things feel as easy as possible. Just of course without the knowledge of how do you make things feel easier in the most relaxed way possible. So I was always thinking like, okay, I need to let go of the stick more if I want to play faster. Like I knew that. I can't squeeze the stick too much if I'm doing a roll because then there will be faster buzzes, and I don't want that. Okay, great. So it was always like little snippets up until college, and I was I was more than decent. I was a good player in college. And then it wasn't until I saw Mark play through a window at DePaul, and I was just like, I heard someone play snare drum, and it sounded like a normal snare drum, and then there was like a 30-second pause, and then this gigantic amount of sound just emanated from the room, and I was like, I had never heard a snare drum sound like that, and I was like, who is that? And so yeah, by then I took one lesson with him, and he didn't really say much. He was just like, okay, this sounds good, I'll see you next week. And I was like, well, are you going to tell me how to do the thing? Like, I guess I must, hopefully we'll be on the right track. And then he essentially was saying, the way he explained it was that all of the strokes that he does come from his lower back. And I'm like, it comes from your lower back. What does that mean? Does that mean you're like Bruce Lee throwing from your back? And yes, that's what it means. And so I'm like, okay, how do you make a connection between your wrist and your lower back? I guess there must be a chain reaction that happens. Okay, so how do you create a chain reaction coming from your back without moving your back? And so that's another little question he like starts. And then eventually we talk about Feldenkrais technique. And then I'm like, oh, that's how he's able to connect his motion from his wrist to his back. I'm like, okay, great. And then, so that's like 2011, 2012. I think I got really good at it by 2015, but something happened in 2015 where I realized how easy it actually was. And it was like, wait, it's this easy? And it shocked me to the point where I didn't believe it. Like, no, this is too good to be true. It can't be this easy. Like everybody's like freaking out over saw playing and cymbal playing. Like it can't be this easy. And so it wasn't until 2017 where I was like accepting of the fact that it was this easy.
Like this idea of playing with your lower back, or just of playing with complete relaxation?
Yeah, complete relaxation, being able to play from any part of the body to get as much weight or as little weight as you want without you having to use any muscular tension, like at its lowest form. Of course, like specific situations, you have to use some compensation of some kind. Like if you need to play a loud roll, you need to like, play more with the forearm, which means the wrist can't be too loose. It needs to be slightly more stable. Like there's certain compensations for certain situations, but at its lowest form, you could do everything with nothing.
Okay. What I'm still maybe a little fuzzy on, like, when you say, is it really this easy? Like, what was that moment like? Or like, how was it different than before?
Great example. Okay. obviously you can clap like this, right? Okay, this might be a good example. So everybody claps this way, right? Okay.
Mhm.
But gravity goes this way. So the easiest way to do this, even though it's not the most practical, is to just let it drop.
Mm.
I didn't realize how much you could let it drop. Let's just say that. Um, to the point where if my right arm was paralyzed and I just let my arm weight drop, that automatically gets me a loud sound without me having to go throwing it.
Okay, yeah.
And so you're basically learning how to throw your own body weight on the drum instead of placing it on the drum.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could just like Chris Lamb calls it dancing through strokes. I don't know if he's thought of it this way, but that's essentially what Chris Lamb talks about is like dancing through strokes, always continuous motion. Yeah, and just working and dancing with gravity instead of making it do something every time. So you're more like guiding the stroke instead of making it go a certain way, or you know what reactions will result in what sound you want.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing because the more I do it, I don't know, sometimes it feels like as a musician, it's all about being in control. You know, you're like the master of the moment or the universe, and you have tamed this instrument. And I feel like that's the thing that had me so tense, is because I was trying to control it. And now I'm reading your book, and it's like, well, you can just let it fall. And you don't actually have to control it. Maybe it's better if you don't. And I don't know if you ever had that moment of realization, but that's been pretty wild for me.
Yeah, my first teacher, she said you have to lose control to gain control. And like, of course, as a kid, you don't really realize what that means, you know, until I guess 14 years later or something. But yeah, it's like you get used to being out of control because you kind of know what will happen when you do lose control or something like that. So you're just used to the results of letting go, I guess.
Yeah. I'm curious, like, I think so many musicians, you kind of have to get to this point, right? Because I'll be honest, like, playing your exercises is really demanding, way more demanding than any like really technically difficult thing I've done.
I know. I'm
so
sorry.
Mindful and aware. Like, it's exhausting. Just playing quarter notes like 40 BPM, and I'm just exhausted by the end of it because of how focused you have to be. And it's also not like, it is really fun for me now because there's like so much to take in and I'm learning about myself. But if I was 10, I would not be up for this. You know, like, I could not learn this way. But I also feel like this is kind of a process you have to go through to really play. And I think this is true for any instrument, not just drums. And I think of this like Phoenix paradox with musicians where like you have to like completely, you get to a point where you're finally ready to get mindful and in deep on technique, and then you have to rebuild your entire technique. Like, I don't know. There are people who never do that because they manage to get really good with maybe harmful technique and like they're in too deep, you know. But even I think anyone would benefit from a reset. But it's very scary, and like you definitely like potentially sound worse because you're learning this new technique and you have to restart. How do you deal with the pressure, especially like when you're in school, when you're supposed to be getting better, and then you like restart your technique and you have to grow from a better foundation? How do you deal with that when you approach techniques with your students?
I think something I stumbled upon as a very young. I was always interested. So the way I was taught, I was brought up in the percussion scholarship program, and every year they have a new group of kids. So every year since the second year I started with them, I would help the teacher start the new group. So I would be essentially relearning all the basics every single year. Like, oh, this is your thumb, this is your first finger. Oh yeah, this is how I started. And every year I would go through that process of resetting my technique and making sure, like, okay, what are the core values of the, well, like, what's the basic technique? Let me go through this over and over again. And I think if everyone were to do that, like, to at some point in the year, because after a while you get into this like habit of playing that works for the demands of life through the season. And then if you were to just continue to keep that, you start losing like maybe the flexibility you used to have when you didn't have to play every week for 17 hours a day. So I take advantage of every summer to reset and rediscover, okay, that's my arm, that's my forearm, this is my wrist, these are my fingers, like every year. And I feel like if everybody were to do that on a regular basis, it wouldn't have to be a demanding, like, okay, it's been 17 years since I first learned how to hold a stick. Let me reset everything at the 17-year mark. And I think the other thing is with this type of technique, Jojo Mayer, I love quoting people. It's always the question is always there. Can this be easier? If it can, in what way? So it's never like once you start on this path, you never have to completely reset. You're always at ground zero, essentially, which is the cool thing.
To go somewhere from where you're at.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a great way of putting it. Because I'm at this place lately where, like, I think confidence is so dumb. Like, I think it's so overrated. I think it's the most overrated trait that at the same time is like the most coveted in America, is that you have to be really confident about things. And as a musician, it's like, well, you need to just be more confident in your playing. And the whole problem is that in order to be confident, you have to decide that what you're playing is right. And then you have to defend that. And I think so much of the stress is defending this commitment to being right. Whereas if you're just curious instead, then you don't have that pressure, because if you're not wrong, that means you get to get better, and that's a good thing. I love this approach to technique, especially because it embodies curiosity. Like, you're always just hopeful that there's more tension to get rid of, and you find it and feel like, how can I make this feel better? And I also, it's interesting because it's so self-driven. It's just kind of like, here's some super basic exercise. Now it's your job to be aware of what's going on and scan through your body. And it gives a lot of control to you as a student. And at first I was like, I don't know if I'm capable of addressing these myself. Like, I need someone telling me to do this. But the more I'm doing it, the more I am finding things every time I practice. And so do you think that technique, like, how do you view self-driven technique development and driven by a teacher?
Yeah, I think though, specifically because I don't know if anyone else is out there teaching this specific stuff in this kind of detail. So I was hoping that through the book I would give enough specifics to help guide the thinking better, so that people would feel a little bit more confident. If they know what to do, then they will do it, hopefully, and feel more confident that, okay, I know that if I want a darker sound, I need to throw more from my pinky finger. Okay, I know to do that now because I read it in a book. But my hope also is that when more people do follow this type of thinking, that they'll know some more shortcuts to help students with. Like, now I'm always with my students, I can hear whether or not their thumbs are too tight, or I can see if their shoulder isn't as engaged on one side as the other. And I can be like, oh, notice your shoulder, notice, like, essentially like a Feldenkrais teacher would do. If they see something going on with your left foot, they might be like, oh, notice your left knee. and that will draw your brain more to your knee, and then that'll help you notice more things about your left side, hopefully. So yeah, I'm I think at the end of the day, you have to find your own way of executing well, not even executing. You have to find your own way of getting the point across. And what might work for one teacher might not work for one student. And so a teacher has to be willing to change and find the correct key to unlock the students, whatever. So yeah, I think it has to be a balance, but yeah, it's definitely a self-driven thing. Like a lot of people can tell you what to do, but if you're not willing to, number one, ask the question, number two, do the thing, or number three, ask if there's more that can be done and not just regurgitate what someone told you to do, then you're just going to be a carbon copy of the teacher, essentially, instead of finding your own way of saying what you want to say.
Yeah. I feel like the mindset of knowing that like the way that you do things isn't the best way for other people to do things is easy to say, but actually very hard for me to like accept sometimes, because I have all these conversations and these people, like a lot of them reinforce these same ideas that like lead to wellness, and then I'm like, this is like how you do it, like, and then sometimes when you look at someone else's life, it's like, well, actually maybe it doesn't work for them. But like in this, like you go through and you spend hours like mindfully doing these basic strokes, and you from personal experience that this works for someone, and then like a student is like, no, that doesn't work for me. That must be very hard to just let go, like, oh, I guess it doesn't work, because you're kind of committed to it in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with that? Like,
you're committed to the dogma.
Yeah.
Bruce Lee, I forget there's an interview of Bruce Lee talking about this. Yeah, it's weird because with me, I basically found so many solutions for one problem. So if I see a student struggling with that one problem, I have like 10 things I can automatically tell them to try. And it's rare where those 10 things don't work, and I have to be like, oh, okay, now I have to figure out, okay, so what else could be going on? Maybe their lower left back is too tight, and so I have to essentially empathize with the student and try to put my body in their shoes, essentially. So, okay, what would I be doing to create this sound? Case in point, there was one person who was suffering from tennis elbow, and I've never had tennis elbow, but I know what movements cause the muscle or the tendon in here to be too active. And so I was like, okay, so it could be that the rotator cuff is too turned outward. It could be that they're lifting too much with their ring finger. It could be that they're squeezing too much in the pinky. And so I go through all of those different things and find the solution for that student. But yeah, it's definitely, I have to be open to the possibility that I am wrong, even though I know the core belief system, hate to call it belief system, is right. But yeah, like it's definitely, I have to always put myself in the shoes of a beginner. Like, I don't know what's wrong. Let me learn what's wrong and figure out how to help, instead of like, oh, I know the solution to this, let me just tell them to do blah, blah, blah. So now my teaching's going from automatically saying, do this, to what do you feel? And trying to figure out like, oh, they feel this. This means this. Oh, okay, so the problem's probably here. And then that gets me to the solution quicker, instead of me going, these are my prescribed ways of solving this issue. Let's hope one of these works.
Yeah.
And waste time.
Well, that's cool. I also like, you're just giving your students a chance to, it's almost like an exercise of, they have to scan themselves and figure out like, oh, what do I feel like? And I think that's the big thing, is just asking that question more. And I don't know, it's interesting. Like, I started doing yoga a bit back as my first kind of big thing to alleviate tension. And I'm way more flexible than I was like a year ago, but I also don't know if I feel any less tense overall. And so I think this book and this line of thinking have helped me realize that, like, just stretching can help undo it, but what's causing it is these like habits that are putting tension and stress in places. How do you think that, like, how do you incorporate this kind of thing into a university curriculum or something? I don't know. Like,
yeah,
I think that's a tough part, because it is so student driven, but I also think it's so helpful.
Yeah, I think my hope is one day I'll have a summer camp to start, because as soon as you introduce someone to this type of thinking, I guess legitimately you only need like one class to get you started. But if you were to repeat it, then there could be a section of a semester where you just literally just play on the floor. Like you're on a yoga mat, you have boom stands set up, and you're just playing on the floor to learn how to throw the stick. Like there's so many. My friend Dylan Moffitt, we geek out all the time talking about these things you find in life that could be applied to drumming. Like the natural motion of your rotator cuff when you run is the same type of motion as like timpani strokes if you were to just let it drop. Like, so the possibilities are endless with percussion, because we have to move to create our sound. And so if we learn how to move better, if we take a dance class, yoga, Feldenkrais, Wing Chun, martial arts, Tao Jeet Kune Do, like that's basically where all this comes from. It's just a combination of everything we know about Joe Morello, Jim Chapin, Sanford Moeller, George Lawrence Stone, and the likes of Chris Lamb, Jojo Mayer, Mark Demalakis, and those kinds of people. Take all that information through the lens of Feldenkrais technique with like moving efficiently, apply the knowledge you will have with the technical base that like violinists and pianists have, and then funnel that into a curriculum.
Well, when you put it like that, it sounds simple.
Yeah, it's really just all that. But yeah, it's the problem is like all of these different things are so well, number one, they're personal, but like unless you have an ear or a willingness to hear the differences between what happens when you throw from your first finger and what happens when you throw from your pinky, then it just seems like if you tell this to someone who just thinks the drum sounds one way, they won't want to spend the time doing this. Like had I not heard Mark play, I wouldn't know that the drum could sound 3 different ways. With the same stick on the same beating spot with the same like hinge. Like it's just
Okay, I think that is the big thing, because so often it's like, well, why does technique matter? You know, like why are we spending time on this? Let's just play. Until you realize that not only do these tiny changes just affect how your body feels and the health of yourself, you know, but also these huge differences in playing. I think that is like the biggest arrival point, because most of the time I think technique is like, okay, I have these exercises that I do and this is my routine, and I just do them to like warm up so that I can do the actual musical thing, instead of technique being this thing of addressing like, well, where am I at today? How can I make it better? How can I then actually make the music that I'm trying to play speak like I want it to? So is there a way that you go about like fostering that excitement about technique, particularly maybe in younger students? You're right.
Yeah,
You have to hear that difference, but how do you help someone do that?
I usually address it where the student is at. So like the only way, okay, so if I'm going to teach someone how to do a roll for the first time, I usually say, okay, the only way you can do the cool stuff is if you let the stick bounce. So hopefully they'll be more motivated to let the stick bounce more so that when it comes to do the cool stuff, they can do it. That's usually what I start with, like super, super beginners. Now, if someone already knows how to do a double stroke roll, then we could address that's usually by that time I have to correct a lot of stuff because people have bad habits by then. So then I could say, okay, you know how to do a double stroke roll with your forearm. Can you have the same feeling in your fingers and do your wrist only? And then that hopefully will help them separate what it is to do this motion and the wrist motion. Okay. Yeah, and I think with certain people, sometimes they just want to be able to do the thing and not have other options outside of that. Other times they like, oh, I can't play soft. Okay, well, can you play tap strokes? What's a tap stroke? Okay, now we have to talk about stroke types. Oh, I can't play soft buzzes. Can you play a tap stroke? Yeah, I can play a tap stroke. You can play soft buzzes. And then they're like, wait, what? Are they the same thing? Yes, it's the same thing. So yeah, it gets, if it's essentially trying to help them use their prior knowledge uh, to get across the hump instead of thinking that they have to learn something completely different. Like they know, like, yeah, that's essentially what I try to do with students is use something that they know how to do and help that piece of knowledge take them over the hump. Um, like for instance, they know how to do a double stroke roll with their forearm, which means their fingers are already creating the spacing needed to make a double stroke. Okay, so you can have the same spacing in your fingers and just move your wrist instead. So that's one, like that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm trying to always find those connections. Um,
Yeah.
as far as encouraging them to do it on their own, hopefully I mean, the way I teach, I get really excited. So hopefully me feeling open enough to, or vulnerable enough to be excited on their little itty bitty amount of progress that they think is super, super small, hopefully will give them the encouragement to be that excited over something that's super, super tiny. Like, oh my gosh, I just relaxed my pinky finger more. This is great.
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing, instead of trying to be like, I still can't play Kiji perfectly in time with all the rhythmic integrity things perfect. Like, why is that? Like, you know, I'd rather be like, I can play softer today. Yay, great. That will help all of my soft playing instead of like, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. You said something at the start of the book that like really threw me. The first exercise where you're laying on the ground and just getting comfortable with what relaxation is. And then you said like memorize that feeling. I had never considered that to like I guess I don't feel like people really think about good feelings all that much, you know, or sit with them and give them ourselves permission to feel them. And that was pretty wild. Like, how far have you gone with that idea? And what does that exactly mean?
Incredibly far. Like this is the secret, like I don't know, like you go to you play Super Mario and you can find those like hidden areas if you go down the right rabbit hole or something, or base boss. So the more relaxed you are, the less tense you are, which means your body's able to just move freely. Um, another way of looking at this is, you know, getting rid of the armor or the filter, because if you can hold back tears, right? Or you can choose to not hold back tears. We know what the feeling is where you're like trying to hold that feeling in instead of just letting it go. Same kind of thing with movement. If we allow ourselves to experience the feeling and let our bodies react to that feeling, because if we're holding I love the example, okay, if I'm holding a cup and I'm really sad, like the cup's going to be heavy. I'm not going to grip it this way when I'm depending on people's reaction. For me, if I'm sad, I'm just going to be like, if I'm angry, I'm probably going to like the body changes. What's his name? Marcel Marceau. He's a mime, or was a mimer. He wrote a bunch. I don't know if he wrote a book, but he has a bunch of quotes about this, where in silence and in stillness, you should be able to read what the body's feeling. Of course, it gets into like a paradox. So if we're able to move with those feelings infecting the movement, then the sound will directly be tied to us, not just us manufacturing. Shostakovich is loud and intense, so I must play with more forearm and more 16th note spacing in the rebound so that it will sound more intense. Like you could do it that way. Like that could be the 1 + 1 = the universe kind of thing.
Like if you algorithm generated like version of it.
Yeah. And something that Mark and I always butted heads about was I was always interested in the equation. Like what equation will get me this? He always wanted me to start at this and figure out the equation later. Like, or the equation didn't even matter. So the way I teach now, I have both working in tandem where I'm looking for this and let me figure out, okay, so this worked, why? Okay, the why doesn't really matter. I just am glad I know why. So kind of like that kind of thing. But yeah, but like if you just the same thing can happen if you just embody the music and okay, Shostakovich makes me feel kind of anxious and more jittery. What can I let that infect my natural movement? Okay, instead of trying to make it do it. If your body's in a relaxed state, then it can do it naturally and it'll naturally happen instead of you having tension and then trying to feel the anxiety. And then the anxiety has to be filtered through the tension and then it might break the drum instead of you having a relaxed form and then you feel the anxiety and then it naturally does it without any extra hindrance or muscular tension or anything. So then you have a better sound. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you talked about like you can hold back tears. I feel like the more I try to shed this tension, I realize that I'm holding in like pain and areas of like past injury and things that I'm almost like protecting with this layer of rigidity, you know? And one thing that I didn't expect was to like start doing this and then actually feel worse some days because I've unlocked this pain that I was holding in, you know? And is that something that you experienced? And like, how do you convince students that it's worth it and that's actually a good thing? Because it's not exactly like fun to find that.
Yeah, this gets into the other bag. So this okay, so I'll preface it with this is different than practicing through pain. Because like if something hurts, you gotta stop doing the thing, or else you'll injure yourself. The other thing, like you were saying, is that because of past trauma, I mean, this can go beyond just drumming.
Yeah,
because of past trauma. Yeah, so because of past trauma, we may or may not have built a shield around that and not actually let that spot heal properly. Yeah, so it's definitely a daily thing. Like obviously, if your body, well, that's the other thing. Okay, so the way I usually have people do this is so that the body can heal properly. You have to go all the way back to ground zero and relearn or reintroduce yourself to the body's range of motion. Um, and anybody in what do you call in what do you call that um rehabilitation stuff. I can't remember the exact name. I can't English. Yes, physical therapy. Thank you. Good lord. Um, but yeah, they essentially try to figure out what's the range of motion at the time of injury, and can we promote more range of motion through rehabilitation, trying to figure out like, okay, what's hindering this. Okay, the muscle's hurting there. Okay, so that's the range of motion you have today. Are there exercises that we can introduce more range of motion around that, not directly at? Okay, so I would say any student who experiences that, especially when you realize how much tension you've been holding, you might feel either a super release, or you'll feel what do you call it, like a phantom tension, because some people will feel like they're holding tension somewhere even though everything's relaxed. Like I there's no way I can relax more, but it still feels like it's there, because it's like a residual effect of you always holding tension there. It's like a phantom thing. Oh my gosh.
That's
But yeah,
it's where like stretching is actually important, because you have let go of the muscular tension, but now it's still tense because you got stretched out, but you aren't.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a desire to go back to the habit or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's exhausting. Like this is the hardest practice I've ever done.
With quarter note eighth notes.
Yeah, but it's incredibly rewarding. And okay, the last thing you said really hit me. It is true. We measure health in like range of motion, right? And you start the book with the quote you learned in dance class, which was take space, right? And now that hits even harder. Like it is, and you can go so much farther with it too. Like how much space do you take up in your life, not just physically, but emotionally, and travel and learning different things, like just growing, right? Man, I think that's awesome. And I love that you can take that same feeling and distill it down to like the smallest version, and like that's what technique is. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, well, not that it. This is why in a certain one year I kind of lost the line between practice room and real life, because I was just like, how am I holding the cup? How am I walking? Like that kind of thing. But it shouldn't feel I don't know. At some level, it felt liberating to know that like how I am is fine. I don't have to do anything else other than just be within myself, or let my emotions come out, so that if I need to play a certain way, it just happens, and instead of me trying to manufacture it in the practice room, kind of thing. At the very least, you should should be trying to recreate it, or find the things that inspire it, and then you can always have that in the back of your mind, or something like I know what I need to do to make light sounds great, so that I can recreate it later, instead of trying to jimmy rig it all the time. But yeah, it definitely gets into a bag where you can take it to the nth degree of like for instance, for this audition, I didn't practice accessories because I knew accessories. Like I know how accessories work. Okay, play Capricci, not Capricci, play Carnival Overture. Oh, okay, it has this feeling. And so I just embody that and let the technique do its thing instead of me going like, I have an audition in 6 weeks. Let me practice da 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 da. Like just da da to get the point across. Okay, am I missing any clarity things? Probably. Okay, you fix it in the practice room. It just simplifies the process so that stick control isn't just for snare drum, it's for everything. Or cymbal playing can be used in the same way for bass drum. Like everything is connected in because the body doesn't change. Yeah. You also, don't have to do anything different to experience rebound. If you know how to rebound quickly on a snare drum, you probably can play on xylophone. If you know how to rebound slowly on snare drum, you can probably play bass drum. Like it's the gravity doesn't change, rebound doesn't change, depending on the yes, and then the body doesn't change.
Well, I'm getting pumped right now. I am super into Stefan Harris and his whole approach to like charging harmony with emotion, and so that you can tell a story and express yourself in a very real way. And what it really sounds like is you figured out a way to do that with like physical technique. How do I embody this music or like the emotion and energy of this piece that I'm performing? The technique isn't just to like, this is piano, this is forte, this is a quintuplet, It's that this technique I've developed a relationship with that allows me to access this feeling. And that is so cool.
Yeah, it's like I love Stefan Harris. Like it's literally that way of thinking and put together with now I know how to move to make that way of thinking happen. So I can experience this even more. Like I don't have to worry about my technique. I could just let this happen and experience this makes this even more possible. Like it's freaking exciting.
Yeah, that's so cool. But I think it's important to point out that like that connection was intentional, but it probably took a long time to reinforce and explore, and it's ongoing. But like, how do you can you give an example of how you might go through that? Like Stefan has talked about how like this chord or this bass note melody relationship has this effect, Like what's a emotion that you have tied to a specific emotion?
Oh man. The way I teach, I always start with the person's natural state of being. So if we figure out what finger okay, so for instance, the most simplest way you could start is what finger does the stick want to pivot off of? The way you figure that out is the first exercise is you let the stick just bounce after letting it go at the drum. So you figure out, okay, the stick naturally wants to go on my middle finger. For some people, it wants to go on their ring. For some people, it wants to go on their index. Okay, so you start with that. So that's how you figure out the body mechanic, what your natural state of being is for throwing the stick. The next thing, and this again starts with where you're most comfortable. Okay, so if you're most comfortable throwing this, you figure out what your body's most comfortable for. The next thing as far as emotions go is what are you most comfortable feeling emotionally? Okay, usually people like feeling happy. So we start there. Think about, I don't know, what's your favorite holiday? How do you feel what does your body feel like when you think about this? Oh, my lower neck starts warming up. Okay, I want you to only put your brain here, like really feel this and let go. And then it might sound warmer or something like that. If somebody thinks about the time they got scared of a dog or something, then, oh, my jaw starts clenching. Okay, only think about your jaw clenching and let go. It might sound brighter, or more intense of the way you let go. Like putting your brain in the places where emotions pop up. If you think, I mean, you could think of it so many different ways. You could think of it as a chakra graph, a meridian chart. Like for some people, man, like it. For case in point, when I look at mountain time, which is kind of weird. Personal experience. My scar starts, like I start thinking about my surgery scar because I had my surgery in mountain time, and so like it immediately wants to like clench up in that, and I have to always remind myself, no, that's not happening right now. You can relax that kind of thing. So it's like there's some. I mean,
because we talk a lot about mindfulness, not on the show, but just in general these days. Everyone's really into it. And I'm more and more realizing that, like, last week with Frank Diaz, we talked about how just listening to music in a really deep way is a form of mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And playing technique with a body awareness also seems like a form of mindfulness.
Yep.
Yeah. It's all so awesome. And I really love that the essence of what you're doing isn't teaching your body how to do something it doesn't know how to do. It's like letting your body do what it wants to do. Like, how can you be yourself on the instrument? And that is amazing.
Sorry, I just like I get so excited.
Yeah, no, it's just beautiful. It really is.
Yeah, it's like we were saying before with the confidence thing. It's like it's even there could be you could fake confidence, like you can fake that kind of thing, but underneath that has to be, just allowance of you being you being comfortable being you, and you being comfortable being where you are at all times, as you're, okay.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I love it. I have one more question, and then I know you had a lesson. I'll let you go, and I really appreciate all this, but you had talked about how, like, before you got your current gig with the Kansas City Orchestra, like or maybe it was a different gig, like you didn't think that you were good enough to have a major orchestra gig. And then it wasn't until like you accepted that you could, that then you were able to like get to this place, right? What was it that gave you permission or the frame of mind to feel worthy of something that you clearly were capable of because you're there now?
That's a really good question. I think I would say, and this is most of all of this is on my website, recommended study. I can't remember what the actual tab is, but I did a lot of reading. Like, I would say things I struggled with, because for me, technique was never an issue. Like, I could play. I was playing at grad school level in senior year of high school. Like, technique wasn't an issue. What was an issue, number one, was nerves, because you get nervous, and trying to figure out why I didn't feel comfortable doing what I knew I could do. I thought that was the thing that was going to make me not be able to win anything. And it was a combination of, number one, me not being comfortable being myself, being my crazy self on stage, because, it's too much. I need to tame it all down and play the traditional things in the box that I've been given for the music, and that's it. And hopefully they pick me. Like, okay, good. And a combination of me being okay with my belief system, my way of expressing music, my uh, like these concepts, because I was really on these like weird things about, I noticed that my first fingers plays more bright. That's interesting. No one else told me this. Um, it's too crazy, like that kind of thing. I just was more accepting of the way I saw music. And I think after reading a bunch of books and just trying it out and not worrying about how people would receive my ideas, I just every so often I'd let one slip out and see if it was okay, and then another one slip out and see if it was okay, until one audition where I really wanted this job, and I did everything I thought the panel wanted. I dressed a certain way, I walked a certain way, I played the music a certain way that I thought would be the most white way of playing. And I got cut in a very bad way. So the comments were very not good. After that, I was so angry that me trying to do everything correctly got me nowhere. And so I was determined to just do everything my way, because the other way wasn't working. And I might as well, if I'm going to do this, if I can't be myself and win the job, I don't want to do this anymore. I said that in 2017. Lo and behold, I do that and I win my first job doing everything the way I want to do it. And I don't know, finding that it wasn't even confidence. It was just me being brave enough to just be me and not care what happens. Like a lot of stuff was riding on me winning that job. And I was like, don't think about it. Just be me. Just play music. Just, just play music. I don't care about the outcome. Even though I really cared about the outcome on stage, I just was like, the more I care about the outcome, the worse it gets. So let me not care about the outcome at all and just see what happens. And after I've done that a couple times, now I'm just like, ooh, let me go be myself kind of thing. I'm more I'm more confident in doing that. And it's easier for me to just play Kiji because I know it's so easy. Like it's going to be beautiful kind of thing. My teacher, Eric Milstein from DePaul, was always like, yeah, just play the music. You've done the work. Don't even think about that. Just play the music. And I was like, well, yeah, I'm playing the music, but I'm playing it through this manufactured thing instead of me just enjoying Kiji. Like what would the drum be if it didn't matter? Like what would this, how do I make the drum feel like it's my teddy bear when I was 5? Like, okay.
That's awesome. And I guess I want to ask now, like, this pressure to be a certain way, especially like in this very regimented, controlled style of playing, at least from my perspective. Like I don't play classical music, but it feels that way. Like how you need to fit this mold to get these jobs, and that wasn't working, and then being yourself was so liberating. Like I feel like that might, or I guess, how does that compare to your experience as a Black man in America?
Yeah, it's legit. Yeah, it's the same thing, because society, I'll say this, the way I was the way I experienced life up through college, there was always a negative spin on anything that was culturally seen as Black, rap music, or things that were negative about being Black, like rap music, stuff like that. And so my life has always been kind of avoid the bad things so that they don't see me as the bad kind of Black person, which in and of itself is the most damaging way of going about life. So trying to figure out, so beyond the drum thing, like how do I feel about being Black in the space of, mainly white people. Like, do I feel comfortable in this space? No, I don't. Okay, how can I feel more comfortable in the space? Because if I don't feel comfortable in the space without playing, how am I going to feel comfortable playing an audition? Um, and so most of my the people I talk to about this is one of the reasons I'm doing this free lesson thing for people who identify as African American or Black, because I never saw anybody in a percussion position that looked like me ever. I had heard by college, in college actually, I heard about Tim Adams and Rainer Carroll. Before college, I had no idea there was anybody else. And maybe had I had seen Tim Adams or Rainer Carroll, that I would have, that might have helped. Who knows? But yeah, I think all that to say, dealing with the societal pressures and negative ways that people see African Americans or people of color, and trying to find some way of not only coping with that, but in some ways ignoring it, just so that I can not be negatively influenced or respond negatively to it, or be bogged down by it long enough to do the thing. And that took a long time. And I have a lot of people to thank. The Detroit Symphony Fellowship. They really helped me feel like a colleague and not the African American fellow dude who is subbing with us. Which I was always like, oh, I'm just a sub. That wasn't a real audition that I won. That was just an intern thing. Like, they were like, no, you won an audition to play in this orchestra. You are a colleague for as long as you're here, not a sub. Like, they really, they hammered that in. And of course, if you have bravery and courage enough to start giving yourself those types of positive talk, like, you can nurture positive self-talk. And you have to start with something that you actually can believe, and to not be like, oh, that's a lie. Like, you have to start with something you can really own, even if, I don't know, like, if you have a mentor who says you can do it, then someone has said you can do it, and so you can feel comfortable saying, okay, maybe I can do it, instead of like nobody saying you can do it, and then you trying to feel, oh, can I do it? No one told me. Like, and some levels you do need help with that, but once you get started, it's just making a habit of it. And I don't know, as soon as I started doing that, I started getting adamant about just maintaining it and nurturing it, until finally, okay, now I feel comfortable as a Black person in an orchestra. Great. Now I need to deal with being Josh in an orchestra. Like, I'm really weird. I have a lot of musical ideas. I move a lot. Like, when I play, like, are people going to be weird when I'm doing these weird motions to create these sounds? Hopefully not, whatever. So it's definitely something I've thought of and worked on, and continue to work on to this day. And I think that's life for you. Like, you're never going to end practicing if you want to continue to grow. You're never going to end growing if you want to continue to live. Ooh.
Ooh. There it is.
I love these.
All right. Well, I'll let you go, but thank you so much for all of this. And before we're done, if there are any projects, I know you got a new book coming out, anything you want listeners to know about or where to find you, go for it.
If anyone's seen the last video from my Instagram, book 2 is still coming out on time. I just have to add 3 paragraphs because of this new discovery. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to be as helpful as I can. So if anyone has questions, feel free to DM me on my Instagram, Josh Jones Drums. I still teach lessons. I have plenty of space in my studio. So if you have any questions about that, DM me at Josh Jones Drums. Website is drummojo.com. It has my brain on the internet. So anything I've worked on or thought of or done to do all the stuff we talked about today is on that website. Audition tips are on there. Everything I did for this audition is on my audition website, on my website, drummojo.com. Free. Okay. And yeah, and everything I study to get to whatever this is on drummojo.com as well. So you can go through the same videos that I watched, the same books I read, and all that stuff. Or you could just buy the book and Spatial Studies for Hitting Things, book 1, and just read it in there.